say some intro words before we start. Thanks for coming, thanks to my committee, all that stuff. That was Rhapsody for Euphonium, written by James Curnow and dedicated to his euphonium teacher, Leonard Falcone. Falcone was a Sicilian-born immigrant, director of the Michigan State Band for 40 years, and a renowned teacher and performer of the baritone and the euphonium. Additionally, he is celebrated for his contributions to the euphonium at a time when, due to the decline of professional civilian bands in the United States, the instrument was in danger of becoming obsolete. He was born in Recital, Italy in 1899, the youngest of 3 sons. His first taste of band performance came at the age of 8 in the Italian band tradition. The local ensemble, the Recital Municipal Band, was well known and highly skilled. Falcone began studying alto horn with the band's conductor, Donato Donatelli, in 1907, with the hopes of being admitted into the famous conductors ensemble. It was the practice of the village that all young boys could take a 15-minute lesson with Donatelli free of charge 5 times a week. After 1 year of study, he passed his audition and was admitted for membership into the band. His first year, he played alto horn, a part normally reserved for accompanying passages, and was then promoted to the trombone da canto role, an instrument Falcone referred to simply as valve trombone. In this new role, he was responsible for more melodic passages and solos. In 1908, he began to study with the band's principal cornetist, Filippo de Cesare, a mentorship that would last until Falcone left Italy. Falcone emigrated to the United States in 1915, 3 years after his brother Nicholas. They settled in Michigan and secured positions in the theater orchestras in Michigan, supplying music to silent films. Nicholas played clarinet and served as conductor, while Leonard usually played his valve trombone. The Falcone brothers slowly gained a reputation as skilled musicians in the community. In 1917, by happenstance, Falcone won a violin in a raffle. Having been always fascinated with the instrument, he enrolled in the University School of Music in Ann Arbor in the hopes of getting his performer's certificate. During school, he continued his career in the theater, adding violin to his arsenal and giving his local reputation more potency. He studied violin from 1917 to 1924. His training as a string musician became fundamental to his brass pedagogy, especially in relation to tone, airflow, sensitivity, and vibrato. In 1924, an offer from the Detroit Symphony Orchestra forced him to decide between a career in performance or education. Falcone turned the job down and looked towards teaching. In 1927, Falcone was hired at Michigan State College of Agriculture and Applied Science as the director of band and teacher of wind instruments. Falcone's presence was immediately felt as he brought his high standards and sense of responsibility and discipline to his new position. Falcone's predecessor had been fired for incompetence as he let the standards slip during his tenure. This fledgling band program swelled under its new head, and before long, Falcone had crafted it into one of the most notable band programs in the nation. Leonard Falcone served as director of bands at Michigan State until 1967, by which time his private teaching load had narrowed to only euphonium and tuba. Under Falcone's leadership, the band program had grown from a single 65-piece unit to nearly 400 participants across 3 ensembles. Falcone's career as a baritonist began in the theater orchestras, where he would occasionally substitute out his valve trombone. He was initially attracted to the instrument because he liked the sound of the instrument and he was fond of the music that was written for it. His reputation and fame was kindled in 1923 at the National School Band Competition, where he performed Fantasia di Concerto by Boccolari, receiving great acclaim from the biggest names in professional band. John Philip Sousa is quoted to have said, "I have many fine baritone players in my band, but this Leonard Falcone surpasses them all. This particular performance led to a plethora of solo appearances for Falcone, solidifying his reputation as a baritone virtuoso. The period of time prior to Falcone's appointment at Michigan State is often referred to as the golden age of band, due to the popularity of band as an entertainment genre. This golden age, generally accepted as 1880 to 1925, nurtured the success of several prominent band leaders such as John Philip Sousa, Edwin Frankel Goldman, Arthur Pryor, and Patrick Gilmore. Each of these bands often used the euphonium as a solo instrument, elevating players like Simone Mantilla, Joseph DeLuca, and John Raffaiola. It is safe to say that with so many professional civilian bands employing euphonium soloists, it is likely this period had hundreds of professional euphonists. The work of John Philip Sousa can give a glimpse into the general role of the euphonium during this time period. Often the euphonium was used in a manner parallel to that of the cello in the symphony orchestra, as a melodic tenor-voiced member. In this portion of the Stars and Stripes Forever, the euphonium and the cornet work together in a similar way as would the violin and the cello. The euphonium and baritone parts of this nature were what attracted Leonard Falcone to the instrument initially. In the 21st century, band music from the Golden Age is seen primarily as a genre of entertainment and popular music. However, its popularity began to wane in the 1920s. The rise of jazz music, plus the visual stimulation of the cinema, threatened to unseat the band as a primary source of entertainment. The rise of the symphony orchestra in the United States would add fuel to the blaze, as the period between 1880 and 1925 saw the establishment of 19 professional symphony orchestras. This was an issue for the euphonists in the United States who found no regular role in either medium. The continued trend threatened to obscure the once prominent solo instrument. The fate of the euphonium was likely saved by the academic band movement of the 1920s, which sought to promote band music in schools. School instrumental music programs in the United States began at the start of the 20th century, led primarily by musically educated Civil War veterans. With the professional bands on the decline, instrument manufacturers, fearing a slip in revenue, supported the movement to promote school bands. The establishment of the collegiate band in the 19th century had provided band a home in schools previously, but these bands were often more related to the military than to music education. With bands in schools becoming more common in the public school setting, this trend would change over the next few decades and support more civilian involvement, especially from students. The National School Band Competition was established in 1923 as a way to promote this movement. This is the same competition from which Falcone gave his famous performance of Fantasia di Concerto. The movement to improve music education through band programs in schools, along with the advocacy of figures such as Leonard Falcone, is likely the reason why the euphonium and the baritone horn are, in the 21st century, still considered primary instruments worthy of serious study. Despite the flagging interest in professional bands in the United States, Falcone fostered a healthy-sized studio for much of his time at Michigan State. His studio gained a national reputation for excellence and produced notable players such as Roger Behrend, Marty Erickson, and Earl Lauder. Of the students studying euphonium as a primary instrument, there was a general variety of the instruments that were used, as Falcone never required specific equipment from his studio. However, most of his euphonium players played on euphoniums rather than the smaller bore baritones. Falcone was certainly aware of the advantages of the British-style compensating euphonium that was introduced in the United States in the 1930s, although throughout his career, he continued to perform and teach on the smaller bore baritone. He believed firmly that the music itself was always more important than the instrument through which the music was achieved. Falcone's teaching style had very specific priorities. Music was always paramount. Even the most rudimentary of exercises had to be played with the utmost level of musicianship. In general, Falcone taught rhythmic and technical concepts first, believing them to be more difficult to grasp and thus making the lyrical concepts easier by comparison. In all things, Falcone demanded a beautiful, flowing, resonant sound even while the student was building technique. Due to his background in violin, Falcone constantly equated brass-playing elements to string instruments, urging his students to imitate the sound and flowing vibrations of the cello. These concepts are particularly present in his approach to tone, style, vibrato, and airflow. He equated the flow of air to the speed of the bow on the strings, a concept mirrored by modern pedagogues as well. His training on the violin helped him to appreciate a free and open vibration and how the instrument resonates with the lips to create a musician's tone quality. Due to the strong influence his string training had on his development, he adapted many string pieces for baritone, including Jean-Baptiste Senai's Allegro Spiritoso. Falcone's formal lessons with Leonard Falcone were normally very casual to start, and he was flexible with how he conducted each lesson. The lesson normally began with a warm-up routine, which helped Falcone gauge how the student's time had been spent in the practice room. If tone quality didn't seem strong, a tone-building etude would surely be covered. In the same way, if technique was an issue, the student would likely find him or herself playing out of the complete method by Durbin. Despite his ferocity, Falcone's demeanor was always respectful. Falcone demanded perfection from both his students and from himself. His high standards were easy for the students to understand because he demonstrated his expectations in his own playing. He taught in a similar way to a jockey urging a stallion during a race, often saying little, but urging, encouraging, drilling, and demonstrating it all through his own playing. He constantly challenged his students and was focused on their needs, possessing an innate ability to interpret the requirements of each pupil's progress. Possibly the most notable part of Falcone's playing and teaching, apart from his technical prowess, is his use of vibrato. Falcone taught a jaw vibrato in a rhythmic manner, starting slowly and increasing speed with the metronome. In general, he thought of vibrato in terms of 16th notes, with slight changes based on tempo, meter, and musical interpretation. This chart shows the general vibrato speed in terms of pulsations per second from Falcone's second album, Leonard Falcone Baritone Horn. As indicated on the chart, he abides by his stance on vibrato at the 16th note. Falcone believed that vibrato should never exceed 16th notes at 86 beats per minute, or 6 pulsations per second. He pushes past this speed limit only twice in the album. The first time this happens is during Estrellita. It is likely that this decision was a musical choice, as Falcone is attempting to add some drama to the music by increasing vibrato speed. The second occurrence of this is during Napoli. This is likely due to the speed of the tempo being 130 beats per minute. Falcone, as an artist, understood that at times the rules should be given some leeway. If he had chosen to vibrate at the 8th note, it would be too slow, robbing the performance of its intensity. To him, the faster vibrato, even if it could be interpreted as a bit too fast, was worth the risk considering the alternative. It should be noted also that Falcone chose a slower vibrato when performing Allegro Spiritoso. 16th notes at 140 beats per minute would involve 9 pulsations per second, pushing well past Falcone's speed limit. Instead, he narrows his vibrato and caps his speed as if the tempo was 86 beats per minute. It must be mentioned that the speeds analyzed are general, with the understanding that the artist will let the vibrato speed flow with the tempo and the music. Admittedly, Falcone's vibrato comes with a certain amount of scrutiny from euphonists in the 21st century. Many have expressed their opinion that Falcone's vibrato is simply too fast. However, when compared to modern euphonists of similar stature such as Brian Bowman and Stephen Mead, Falcone's approach to vibrato seems agreeable with the styles of the late 20th and the 21st centuries. Falcone recorded Estrellita by Manuel Ponce on his first album in 1964. Mead's recording was 26 years later in 1990. However, their tempo and vibrato speed are similar, pulsating between 5 2/3 and 6 2/3 times per second. Falcone's recording of Herman Belfett's Napoli was released in his second album in 1965. When compared to Brian Bowman's 1995 recording, it can be seen that even though several differences are apparent, the nature of their rhythmic approach is similar. Falcone's vibrato, rhythm, and speed are consistent, pulsating approximately 6.5 times per second. more fluid, with a large difference between his slowest and his fastest vibrato speed. On average, his vibrato tends to pulsate just over 6 times per second. Side by side, it becomes obvious that the biggest difference is not speed of vibrato, but rather the width and frequency of use. Falcone employs both of these elements to a larger extent than Meade or Bowman. These aspects likely carried over from his violin training, as string players have been known to employ a pitch variance of up to 1/2 step. Falcone, as the director of bands at Michigan State, was very involved with the promotion and composition of band music in the United States. He was a founding member of the College Band Directors National Association in 1941 and joined the American Bandmasters Association in 1951. Starting in the 1930s, the American Bandmasters Association had been responsible for the commissioning of several new works for band by serious contemporary composers as a way to perpetuate wind repertoire. Composers such as Peter Menon, Paul Creston, and Vincent Persichetti responded to the ABA's promptings and contributed to the wind band's library in the 1950s. Despite this victory for the ABA, Falcone was displeased with the music that was being written. He became quite vocal about his dissatisfaction on the misuse of the euphonium, in particular the absence of a melodic role for the instrument. The ABA and the CBDNA heard his opinions regularly. In 1958, at the ABA's National Convention in 1967, Falcone remarked to Colonel William S. Santelman from the President's own Marine Band that it's as difficult to find a melody in some of those numbers as it is to find the plot of a story in a bowl of alphabet soup. As far as the misuse of the euphonium is concerned, Falcone regularly pointed out that the instrument seemed to have been forgotten by composers. He seems to have a point, as the mission of the ABA was to convince serious composers to write for band in addition to orchestra and choir. However, some of these composers had long histories of writing for orchestra prior and may have been encountering the euphonium for the first or second time. This lack of familiarity surely resulted in a diminished level of importance for the instrument. Examples of these misuses can be seen in the ABA's 1953 commission, Pageant, by Vincent Persichetti. This was Persichetti's third composition for band. However, as can be seen by the score, the euphonium is used primarily as a supporting voice to the tuba, often doubling at the octave, fifth, or unison. In other areas of the work, the euphonium serves a similar role supporting bass trombone and low horns. This is in stark contrast to the melodic use for which Falcone believed the euphonium to be ideally suited as music from the golden age of band. Falcone believed strongly that in order order for composers to understand how the euphonium is best utilized, advocates must talk to them. This was put into practice on his home campus of Michigan State. It was at his suggestion that MSU faculty member H. Owen Reed wrote his first composition for band, Spiritual. So successful was his first composition, Reed set to work immediately on a second, La Fiesta Mexicana. As can be seen in this score, Reed approaches the euphonium in a melodic way, often allowing the section to operate independently of the trombones and the tuba. Often the euphonium is melodically employed in support of the woodwind, which harkens back to its use in the golden age of band. Falcone's influence was again seen in the work of composer Alfred Reed, particularly the composition of his Second Symphony for Band, written for the Michigan State Symphonic Band. Reed wrote this work after speaking at length to Falcone, and thus it contains a substantial melodic role for the euphonium. Other prominent composers influenced by the advocacy and reputation of Falcone include Mark Camphouse and David Gillingham. Seeing how professional bands and their repertoire were in decline during the first half of the 20th century, it stands to reason the amount of solo repertoire for baritone and euphonium in the United States followed suit. Leonard Falcone wrote often on the subject for educational journals such as The Instrumentalist and The School Musician, appealing to composers to answer his pleas for more baritone and euphonium repertoire. This list, painstakingly compiled by Falcone himself, details the solos he viewed as attainable quality options for students in 1939. From this list, it is clear that composers were still hesitant to write for euphonium. Once analyzed, it can be seen that of the 34 pieces listed, 21 were originally written for trumpet or cornet, and 5 were written for trombone. Only 4 of the works are originally for baritone, and they were written prior to 1925, when the euphonium was seen as a viable solo instrument. This small percentage of baritone-intended solos sourced from the United States is evidence of the lack of appreciation for the instrument's lyrical potential. Falcone soon made the decision to take matters into his own hands, arranging many works on his own, including Julius Klangel's Concertino in B-flat and his arrangements of Leonard B. Smith's collection of solos for young players, the Bellman's Solo Series for band instruments. He added to the plethora of instrumental settings of Gounod's vocal work, Ave Maria, by arranging this work for baritone. Possibly the most significant contribution to the advocacy of solo repertoire for euphonium was the result of 3 commercially available albums recorded in the 1960s. These recordings were received with outstanding acclaim from the tuba and euphonium community, with many amazed at his technical prowess and melodic phrasing. Prior to his first album's release, only 2 others existed in the United States, one by Harold Brash and another by Raymond Young. Despite being the first 2, these recordings were not widely known. Falcone's records are remembered by modern euphonists, such as Brian Bowman, as being significant in his development as a young musician. Due to the release of these albums, Falcone gained the regard of many to be the quintessential euphonium sound. The decades following the release of Falcone's first album